If you grew up in the church, you've almost definitely seen it happen. A generation ago, it felt like most teens who were raised in the faith, well, they stayed. But today, a huge number of them are quietly walking away. It's a trend that has a lot of people really concerned, and it begs a massive question. What is going on here?
So let's just talk about the scale of this for a second. The numbers are pretty staggering. Research from Lifeway found that about 2/3 of young adults who went to church regularly as teenagers, they stopped going for at least a whole year between the ages of 18 and 22. So this isn't some fringe thing. It's literally what the majority of kids are going through.
And to put an even finer point on it, some studies estimate that about 1 million young people are leaving the church in the U.S. every single year. Just let that sink in. 1 million. That is a massive shift in the spiritual landscape of a country. And you've probably heard the word for this, right? Deconstruction. It's a term that's really taken hold to describe this whole process of reevaluating and sometimes just leaving the faith altogether. We're talking about people you know from youth group, from mission trips, who now just don't call themselves Christians anymore. It's really become the go-to word for this modern exodus.
Okay, so here's the deal. We're not going to panic about this, and we're definitely not here to mock anyone. Instead, we're just going to take a calm, clear look at 3 big questions. First, what exactly is deconstruction? Second, why is it happening on this huge scale right now? And third, what does a wise, compassionate response actually look like?
All right, so first up, let's get on the same page. What does this word even mean? What are we really talking about when we say deconstruction?
Okay, so at its core, deconstruction is basically taking apart the faith you inherited. It's almost like taking an engine apart, piece by piece, laying it all out on the floor and trying to figure out which parts are essential and which ones aren't. And, asking questions? That's not the enemy here. The Bible is full of people asking God really hard questions. For some people, this process actually makes their faith deeper. But for others, it's the first exit ramp off of Christianity entirely.
And this is where things get really crucial. The problem isn't the questioning itself. The real issue is where we go for answers. See, traditionally, faith was tested and rebuilt on the authority of Scripture. But in a lot of what's happening today, that authority shifts. The final say moves from the Bible to our own personal feelings, or to what the culture around us is saying, or maybe to our favorite online influencers. And when that fundamental authority shifts, well, that's when faith often starts to completely unravel.
Okay, so we know what it is. Now for the million-dollar question. Why? Why are so many people going through this right now? It really boils down to 3 major drivers.
The first reason. It's usually not about some complex theological debate. It's way more personal than that. It's about getting hurt. It comes from really painful experiences inside the church. Things like spiritual abuse, seeing leaders fail spectacularly, or watching a church care more about protecting its reputation than protecting victims.
And this isn't just a vague feeling people have. There's data to back it up. One study found that nearly 1/3 of young adults who left the church pointed directly at hypocrisy or feeling judged. And that kind of betrayal, it can just shatter your trust, not just in an institution, but in everything and everyone connected to it.
All right, the second big reason is a little more subtle, but it's just as big a deal. It's a faith that was never really built to last, because frankly, it was never built to be very deep in the first place. For a long time, so much of youth ministry was more about pizza parties and entertainment than it was about deep, resilient discipleship. Now, what you end up with is a faith that people call a mile wide and inch deep. Young people learn the Christian catchphrases, but they never really learned how to think Christianly. So the moment they get to college or the real world and run into tough questions about science or suffering or why the Bible seems to say what it says, they find out their faith has no real answers and no deep roots to hold on. Which, makes you ask a hard question. If we never gave them deep roots, why are we so surprised when their faith collapses under the first sign of pressure?
And that brings us to our third driver, which, well, you can't ignore it. It's the world we're all swimming in. It's the incredible pressure from our culture, amplified 1,000 times over by social media.
Let's be real for a second. A lot of young Christians are being catechized or, shaped way more by their TikTok feed than by their pastor. The historic Christian faith is built on things like Scripture and community. But then you've got what you might call the internet catechism, and it's preaching a totally different message 24/7. Follow your heart. Live your truth. You define you. And unless the church can offer a better, deeper, more compelling story, that cultural message is going to win.
Okay, so with all that in mind, when someone you love starts going down this path, how should you respond? The goal has to be moving past panic and anger and toward wisdom and real empathy. So let's talk about what that looks like.
We're going to look at 3 really practical steps. 1. Listen before you lecture. 2. Help them distinguish bad Christianity from biblical Christianity. And 3. Offer them a thicker, more robust faith.
And that first one is built on some pretty ancient wisdom. When someone you love starts questioning, your first gut reaction might be to jump in and start arguing. But the most powerful thing you can do is just listen. Ask questions. What started you on this path? What hurt you? What are the things that feel hardest to believe right now? You have to remember, people need to feel heard before they can actually hear you.
Number 2 is so important. You have to help them separate the two. We have to help people see the massive difference between the sins of Christians and the truth of Christ. So if a pastor was abusive, that doesn't make Jesus abusive. It makes that pastor disobedient to Jesus. Often what really needs to be deconstructed isn't the gospel itself, but all the toxic stuff that got mixed in with it, like legalism or nationalism or power-hungry leadership.
And finally, look, just telling someone, hey, stop doubting, that's not a plan. It just doesn't work. We have to offer a thicker, deeper faith, a faith that is actually big enough to handle tough questions, that's rooted in serious study, in church history, and in thoughtful answers. We need to create spaces where we can say, bring your doubts, bring your questions. This faith is strong enough to handle them.
All right, so as we start to land this plane, let's try to look at this whole thing a little differently. Deconstruction doesn't just have to be a story of loss.
Here's a thought to really chew on. Maybe a lot of young people today aren't actually walking away from the real Jesus of the Bible,
But from hypocrisy, from shallow teaching, from a flimsy cultural version of Christianity that simply couldn't hold up under the weight of real life and their real questions.
But you know what? There is hope here. Some of the newest data is showing that while many have left, there's a real slice of Gen Z that's actually showing a new hunger for faith. They're tired of the shallow answers of the internet, and they're looking for real community and real truth. And that leaves us with one last big thought to chew on. What if this incredibly painful process of taking faith apart isn't always just the end of the story? What if, for some, it could be the necessary, difficult first step toward rebuilding their faith on a foundation that is much deeper, much more honest, and much stronger than anything they had before?